So before you buy a 4070 Ti, you may want to take a look at this. I'm going to just play through some games with it at 1440p, the intended resolution. Let's see how it does at different settings. We'll choose a few popular games. And if you like videos like these, remember to subscribe and smash that like button. Helps the channel grow. All right, first off, we're going to play Alan Wake 2. Let's look at the settings. We're going to go to graphics. We're going to do obviously full screen. We're going to try it natively at 1440p. Right here, 2560 by 1440 DLAA. We're going to leave frame generation off for now. But for the graphics, we're going to put everything on ultra or high, the highest that we can possibly go. And that's going to include ray tracing and path tracing, which is extremely demanding on these type of GPUs. Any GPU for that matter, even the RTX 4090. Okay, so now we're basically running native at max graphics. And this isn't a particularly taxing scene. We can see we're getting like 48 FPS or so. Obviously, in a game like this, you want to get probably at least 60, but 40 to 60 is still kind of acceptable because it's very slow. It's not like there's too much action going on. So we can see in these type of cutscenes here, we do get a lot higher frames per second. So let's skip ahead a little bit to some gameplay, and we're right around getting around 42 frames per second. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows 10 Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. In a game like this, I actually think ray tracing and path tracing do make a nice difference, simply because the game is so dark and it relies a lot on little lighting effects. Even this scene here, as we're looking at this camera, you can see that it's kind of, just a little bit of light, and you have some reflections coming from a light. If there weren't interesting light effects in this game, it would be maybe a little bit too dark, so it's nice to have these type of effects. And this isn't like a particularly taxing scene or anything like that. Then we basically walk around. I mean, it feels fine at 41, 42 frames per second. It's not too terrible. VRAM seems to be in check. Nothing too crazy happening. So then, we're walking around here. Now, if we change the settings a little bit, let's see what happens if we leave all the high settings on, like ray tracing and path tracing. But let's turn on frame generation. We're going to keep it at native, DLAA. Let's see, frame generation. It's going to go from 42 to about 74. So 73. So that's a pretty nice bump. And it does feel smoother. Like as I move around, you do feel like it's more fluid being at this higher frame rate. So I do like that. It definitely feels better. Not that 42 frames felt terrible or too choppy, but you can tell that this one, when you move around, you get a nicer, smoother type of feeling here. Now, the only thing I would do if you want much higher frame rates, maybe you can drop it to quality, which is going to drop the resolution a little bit to 1707 by 960. And let's see if we can notice any difference. Obviously now the frames per second, it's gone all the way up to 112. So this is significantly higher than native. And it does feel a bit smoother. Yep. Now, I don't really notice any lack of sharpness or any issue with the resolution. Maybe it's a little blurrier in some spots if you really, really look, but DLSS 3 does a pretty good job of keeping things fairly sharp. I don't think you need to get over 100 FPS in this particular game, so I think at least at 1440p, maybe the optimal setting is to do frame generation and just leave it at that. And that way you'll get a little bit nicer, frames, and it won't be necessarily too blurry or anything like that. Now, what if we took off frame generation and we kept it at DLSS quality? Let's see. If you don't want to use frame generation, if you think that's going to add some latency or something like that, then we get around 65 FPS. Now this is just on quality, so 66 FPS. That's not terrible. Probably might prefer it with frame generation on, especially for a game like this that the latency isn't that big of an issue. So we're getting right above 60 FPS just with DLSS on quality. If you're going to go that far, I think it might as well take advantage of frame generation, especially in a game like this. See, then you get much higher frames per second, and it does feel a little bit smoother. So in general, the 4070 Ti and Alan Wake 2, which is the most demanding game recently that we've seen, I think it does pretty well. Obviously, if you're going to be doing just native without any type of help, it's going to struggle a little bit to reach 60 frames per second, but it does have DLSS, frame generation, things that this game was kind of like built around. That's why NVIDIA pushed it so much. So we can see how it's actually, it does well with the 4070 Ti here. That's certainly not bad. I wouldn't do it at 4K, but at this particular resolution, I think it does pretty well. But what if you did put it in 4K? Let's just see what would happen. Let's put it native. Let's turn off frame generation. Oh, this is going to kill the GPU. I know it. With ray tracing and path tracing. So we're getting down to like 18 FPS, 20 FPS, and this has the latest drivers too, including that hotfix. So that gets way too low. But let's say if we did it on quality with frame generation, and we can see here ray tracing is on, path tracing is on, everything's on high. So at 4K, but with DLSS, so it's basically 1440p. We're getting a little bit under 60 frames per second, it seems. I mean, it does look a little bit sharper than 1440p, certainly. I'm not too sure it's actually worth it with that much of a performance penalty. If you can play it at 1440p, definitely going to be the way to go. So now let's say we play a little bit older game like, Marvel, Guardians of the Galaxy. And let's take a look. Let's see the settings here. This is going to be, once again, 1440p, 2560 by 1440. So graphics, we're going to max out everything on high or ultra, including ray tracing and ray trace reflections. So basically the highest you can go. And if we're just walking around, you can see the frames per second very, very high without needing any type of upscaling. We are already reaching almost basically 100 FPS, and the game does look really, really good. So in an older game like this with a 4070 Ti rather, you really wouldn't have any issue at all running very, very high frame rates. Obviously, if you wanted to get even higher frame rates than this, than 100 FPS, you could pretty much, either drop some of the settings down or maybe use some type of upscaling, in case you want to just get much, much higher settings. But I think for this game, we're generally going to be okay. You would just kind of go into display, and then there's obviously NVIDIA DLSS that you can, play around with here. But getting 100 FPS native, that's certainly pretty good. So, this isn't the newest game, but it just shows you on, some games that used to be a bit demanding. This does have nice graphics, it has ray tracing. You can get some pretty competent performance on the 4070 Ti. And then what if we go to the original difficult game to run? Well, not Crysis, but Cyberpunk. And we're going to put it on ray tracing overdrive. And obviously we're going to use DLSS on quality with frame generation at 1440p. Let's see what happens. There's been so many updates, and the game has been optimized a lot more than it originally launched. Alan Wake uses path tracing as well, and DLSS 3.5 with ray reconstruction. And we can see here, game looks really, really good. Not only is it similar to Alan Wake in many ways, but it's definitely not bad. I mean, 100 FPS with path tracing on. Yes, we are using frame generation and DLSS. I wonder if you turn those off, if you try to run it natively, DLSS and no frame generation, and we're going to keep it on, overdrive. And oh yeah, look at those frames. They drop all the way down to 21. So DLSS is putting in some work here, to make it a much more playable experience. And does it look better native if you're not moving around? The lighting looks really good, especially in this part that I am here. There's a light from a car. There's some lights on the ground here. Definitely some of the best lighting I think that I've seen, and it would make sense. Path tracing is certainly very good. And if we turn it back on, quality, let's see, it still looks just as good, really. It doesn't look blurry or anything like that. Maybe not quite as sharp, but the smoothness in moving around is so much better. Look at that, over 80 frames per second. So I guess DLSS, very impressive, especially in this game and in Alan Wake 2. And it makes an otherwise unplayable experience very, very playable. So I guess that answers the question in a way. Before you buy a 4070 Ti, you should know that it can play at these higher settings with these newest games at 1440p. Obviously at 4K, you're going to need something like a 4080 or 4090 to have a more playable experience. But 1440p is not too bad. I know I've been a little hard on the 4070 Ti because of its pricing and because of only 12 gigabytes of VRAM with 192-bit memory bus. But in many cases with DLSS, if you're playing these type of games, I think overall you'll be okay. And I'm still not really too enthusiastic about the price of the 4070 Ti. If you can catch it on sale for closer to 700, then it's definitely pretty decent. But you know, that's kind of what it is, what the product stack is. There aren't too many options out there anymore. All right, guys, so remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.